Howdy there, folks. I'm Quinn of Snazzy Labs, and this is a retro review of the Apple iPhone, which was announced and released in 2007. Now, this was dubbed as the iPhone 2G when the iPhone 3G came out, but when it initially came out, there was no namology. It was just called the iPhone. Now, why was it called the 2G? It's not because it was the second generation, but it was because it housed a 2G radio. Now, 3G was very much like the LTE of today. It was around, but the chips were very battery hungry. They were not very thin, and 3G had not made it into a lot of markets. They were only in a couple of big cities. So when the iPhone was originally announced and it didn't have 3G, a lot of manufacturers like Palm and BlackBerry and Nokia mocked the iPhone for being inferior to their smartphones. But Apple said we wanted to keep it thin, we wanted to keep it efficient, and we wanted to make sure everyone could use 3G before we released it. And obviously, just because it had 2G didn't make it an inferior phone, and certainly didn't make it not dominate in the market. This phone was prolific. It was announced in 2007 at Macworld in January, and it didn't release until June. Now, that's a pretty long waiting period for Apple. Usually they announce something, and then it's already almost done with production, and it ships a couple of weeks later. But this was not that. When it was originally demoed, it was very similar to what you see on the screen today. It shipped with iOS 1.1. Now, I don't think any phones actually shipped with 1.0, and for pure nostalgia's sake, I have downgraded my iPhone 2G to as low as I can get it, which is iPhone 1.1.1, which was announced as a software update in August of 2007. So this is still very old. No App Store. I'm going to talk about the OS in a minute, but yes, I mean, it was very, even though revolutionary for its time, very inferior to what we have today. Now, I just want to show you the packaging real quick. As you can see, they have slimmed down. We have the 4S and the monstrous original iPhone packaging. But what we also have is a bunch of goodies inside that you no longer get. Now, when I was 14 in 2007, I actually bought this phone with my own money. This was the 8GB model, and it shipped in a 4GB model and an 8GB model for $499 and $599 on a 2-year contract. So this was not only on contract, but it was one of the most expensive phones money could buy. Now, I was 14, I was working as a janitor, and when this was announced in January, I started saving just about every penny I could. And in June, the day this came out, I camped out at my Apple store and bought one with my dad with my very own hard-earned money. And this is still the original iPhone I bought in 2007. This is the very phone I bought, which is pretty awesome. I mean, that's pretty cool for me. I mean, 5 years later, here we are with the 4S. Here I am with a YouTube channel. This all started as a little janitor boy who wanted this really cool phone. Now, I'll talk about the phone in a minute, the actual phone, and then the OS, but I also want to show you what's inside the box. It's very similar to the packaging we see today. When we open this up, we see that there are fingertips, of course, some important product information and warranty information. And then, of course, you have 2 Apple stickers, which are big stickers, not the tiny wimpy ones you get with iPhones today. Now, what you also had was a bunch of accessories. Now, this is not the original charger that it came with. This is actually an iPad 2 10-watt charger, but I did want to show this for a pure demonstrations purpose. It was actually a lot larger. It fit in this little slot here, but it did come with a charger, and it also came with a dock. The iPhone was easily docked into this thing. You could put this on your bedside table, at your desk, whatever. This was included with every single iPhone. And for $599, it probably should have been. However, we don't see that today, and this little dock is, and I think $40 extra now, but it had a lot of awesome features. You could plug it in, go SPDIF out to your stereo system, and use the digital out from your iPhone. It was really cool. Every iPhone came with a dock, and you just don't see that anymore. Of course, it came with a 30-pin USB dock connector, and it also came with a pair of earbuds. Now, this is not the original earbuds that came with it. As you can see here, these are the 4S earbuds. The original iPhone earbuds were the first earbuds to ship with a microphone, but it was not this 3-way rocker that we have today. It was a singular button that was either play, pause, accept the call, or hang up. That was all it did. There was no volume control like there is now, but it was pretty awesome, and it was one of the first phones to really utilize in-call voice with that wired headset. Now, I say that with a bit of salt because Nokia had been doing this for years, but to control the music and to control it in an actual quote-unquote good headset was not heard of. Now, There were a lot of design features that you'll see here on the original iPhone that have stayed true to the iPhone 4S. This whole metal design, this whole glass front. I mean, very, very little has changed in the 5 years that this phone has been out. However, this phone got a lot right the very first time. Now, let's talk about it. It shipped with a glass screen, which I'm not going to get into the story, but when Steve Jobs demoed it in January of 2007, it had a resistive plastic touchscreen, like we had seen on touchscreen Blackberries and a couple of other phones for several years. Now, Steve said right before the phone shipped, you are going to ship this with a glass display. The engineers at Apple said this isn't possible. It can't be done. And Steve said very famously, I don't care if it's impossible or not, you will ship this phone with a glass screen. And sure enough, about a month before the iPhone was announced, a month before the iPhone shipped in June, they said, well, this is going to come with a glass screen, state-of-the-art glass, and it was a durable scratch-resistant glass. And boy, did that change everything. I mean, this glass display is way better than any resistive plastic touchscreen. And it was absolutely prolific in 2007. Now, a lot of the things you still have are commonplace in the iPhone. Back in 2007, there was the proximity sensor, there was an ambient light sensor, and there was also an accelerometer. There was no gyroscope, there was no fancy other stuff, but that was there. Now, it also had Bluetooth 2.0. It was fairly limited. It allowed you to connect to the Apple wireless Bluetooth headset, which I wish I had gotten back in 2007. It was a very expensive $129 Bluetooth headset that worked with the iPhone, although much other better headsets were announced, like Jawbone's Elf and a bunch of other stuff like that. But back in 2007, you could have bought the Apple one for $130, a very expensive accessory. Another accessory you could have bought for, I think, $50 extra was a leather case, and it was really just a leather. It wasn't even a case. It was like a little leather slip that you could put it in. It was terrible. It was extremely awful. And, they don't do much of that anymore, but they did back in 2007. Now, as you can see, the thickness is actually not great. It's a little bit thicker than the iPhone 4S, but not exponentially. I mean, it's pretty darn thin. And this was actually thinner than the iPhone 3G and the 3GS, which came out the year after and the year preceding that. So this was a thin device back in the day. Battery was really good. Talk time, I think, was rated for 8 hours, several hours of standby, close to 100, I think. And it shipped with this very, very awesome 2.0 megapixel camera. No, I'm being sarcastic. This was another reason it was criticized highly, as the camera on here was awful. No autofocus, no zoom, none of that sort. It was just boom, there. And it was a very, very cheap camera. There was no front-facing camera. No phones had front-facing cameras back in the day. And, that was how it was. Now, right here, this black strip, is probably some of you are wondering, is actually an antenna area. This is where the 2G antenna and the Wi-Fi chips are, so that it can go through this metal without decreasing cell signal. Obviously, Apple decided to go with this so that they didn't have the antenna gate problems they had of the iPhone 4. However, this was how they were able to give you proper cell reception, and the reception was actually quite good. Obviously, this was only available on AT&T in the US until, well, even just this past year, 2010, I believe, was when the iPhone 4. No, 2011. January of 2011 was when the Verizon got the iPhone, but for many years, the AT&T had exclusivity to the iPhone. Now on the side here, we have a volume rocker and we have a vibrate switch. Not much has changed, pretty much the same. On the top, we have a sleep-wake button and a SIM card tray. Now right here is a prolific little jack. This is the headphone jack, but as you can see, for pure aesthetic sake, it is recessed. Now, Steve didn't want to put a flush jack like they have on all the iPhones today. He wanted it to look a lot better and have this jack here, and it pissed a ton of people off because almost all the headphones that were being produced did not fit in this tiny little jack. They had the much fatter 3.5 millimeter headphone jacks. And when Apple shipped this, everyone was like, well, what the crap? And a couple of companies like Belkin, Griffin, Scotia, and a couple of others made a lot of money selling these $30 adapters. You'd have one end that plugged into here and another end that plugged into your headphones, so you could use your fatter headphones with this headphone jack. But because of this headphone jack, this is why all the headphone jacks you find today are so thin. It was because of this singular port. And I think it's one of the most understated and forgettable parts about this original iPhone is, boy, did it piss everyone off. But because we have this iPhone is why we have the amazing headphone jacks that are thin and not bulky that we have today. And it was all because of the original iPhone. Now, The OS, of course, was fantastic back in the day. Now you'll laugh at how limited it was. Now, this is 1.1.1, as I stated earlier, and it wasn't called iOS, it was called iPhone OS because even though the iPod Touch was announced alongside this, actually, it was actually not announced till August. I take that back, but it was called iPhone OS, I believe, until iOS 3 when the iPad was announced. Now, what we have here is very, very basic, and iPhone OS 1.1.1 came with two modifications. The calculator had a new icon and the iTunes store was added. But when it shipped, when I picked up my original iPhone with 1.1, I don't think a single phone shipped with 1.0. When it shipped with 1.1, it only had the icons that were on the box. There was almost nothing. Now, the icons like they are today were not movable. Hold the icon down, it didn't wiggle. You couldn't move it around. There were no multiple pages. And most notably, there was no app store. What Apple marketed was that there were web apps. What would happen is you'd open Safari and you would go to a website that was designed for iPhone and you could have HTML-based games and calendars and applications. Obviously, this didn't roll over well because Apple announced the App Store in January of 2008, but for the first year, there was no App Store. Now, what we also had was a very, very limited application set. A lot of the stuff has remained the same. For example, if you open the SMS app, the keyboard is pretty much unchanged. Icons are a little bit more rounded now, and they're a little bit higher quality font. But pretty much, nothing has changed. What happened, though, was when the iPhone originally shipped, and this was another high point of criticism, there was no MMS. And that didn't happen until late 2008. On the iPhone 3G, you could not ship photo or video messages like you were able to do on pretty much every other phone, not even smartphone. Even cheap Nokias could send picture messages, but the iPhone could not. Now, you couldn't send group messages either. It had to be to one person and one person only, which also infuriated a lot of people, including myself. Now, the calendar, as you can see, is pretty much unchanged. There's a few aesthetic design changes over the years, but really, the way you add events is pretty much the same. Same holds true with the Photos album. There were not a whole lot of differences. As you can see, there's a picture of a Lay's bag, which I took. There were not a whole lot of options. You could either email this photo, you could use it as a wallpaper. Now, not as a home screen wallpaper. You could only use it as a lock screen wallpaper. So there was no wallpaper here, but if you did set it as the wallpaper on the front screen, it would act in that manner. Now, there was no double tap. If you double tapped, it actually opened the phone menu, not open the multitasking bar, or not open another application, which is kind of something that's a little bit funny. Now, the camera, as I stated, is a 2-megapixel camera, and it is very, very limited. There was no video. You could only take pictures. The pictures were very slow. The camera took forever to open, and it was quite annoying. Now, what you also had on the iPhone was a YouTube app, and the YouTube app back in 2007 was pretty good, but it has since been essentially unchanged. Now, it says it can't connect to the internet because the API for YouTube has changed. Back in the day, this is when YouTube had star ratings. Now we have the thumbs up, thumbs down. So this app is broken. But as you can see, there's featured, most viewed, bookmarks, search, more. This app is identical to the one that we have today, and it is almost unchanged entirely, which says to Apple, really, guys, after 5 years, you haven't changed the YouTube app at all? And I think the YouTube app, by far, is the weakest point of the iPhone. The Android YouTube app is fantastic, and Apple refuses to let Google develop their own app, which is why we have the sucky iPhone app that we have. Open stocks, we open maps, they're basically the same. Same with weather. These apps haven't changed at all, which is good because they got them right the first time, but the clock, same holds true, not a whole lot changed here. There was a world clock, which Apple touted as like a great feature. Obviously, that's super dinky today, but back then it was a big deal. We had alarms, we had a stopwatch, and we had a timer. Now, like I said, there was no multitasking. When you opened up an app, it opened where it had been opened before, which is, pretty wild. As you can see, it opens every single time. Every time you open it, it reopens the whole app, which is pretty bizarre. Now, when we go into the calculator, you'll see that a ton has changed. It doesn't even look remotely similar. 2 plus 2. Wow, that didn't even work. 22 plus 2 is 24, but the calculator app is a lot different. If you turn it into horizontal mode, though, it didn't do the scientific mode that it does now. That was not announced until the iPhone 3G. And really all the accelerometer was for Safari, as you can see here. And you can see the rotation on that is slow, and that's because there is a 412 megahertz ARM11 processor in here. It was not the beast that it is today. It was very, very slow. And the screen is a 320 pixel by 480 pixel display, unlike the Retina display we have now. Open the settings, things are pretty much the same. It is pretty slow at everything it does. And this was the first version to bring custom ringtones. In the original version, there were no custom ringtones, and that was what the first jailbreak was for. Jailbreak Me, which came out, the only thing it did was it allowed you to add custom ringtones. Maya's jailbreaking come just as far as iOS has, maybe even further. Now, the Notes application is just about the same. You can open it up, you can see all your notes, and there you have it. You could email notes, you could delete them, etc., etc. The email client is the same. Of course, now there's threaded messaging and a bunch of other advantages, but I mean, you can see not a whole lot has changed in this email client. Same folder, same refresh, same reply, same addressing. I mean, there's not a whole lot that's different from the original iPhone. Now, there was multiple account support, but there was no Exchange support, which is another reason this phone was mocked. Unlike a lot of other phones that had Exchange support from Microsoft, the iPhone did not, which is why BlackBerry still reigned king for several years to follow. Now, Safari was very, very limited. The cache was not great, and it crashed on even the most simple websites. As you can see, the Google search bar was in this singular bar rather than the split in half bar we have today. There was, of course, this button which allowed you to add the page as a bookmark, but only to the bookmarks bar. You could not add a little web applet like you can now. That was announced in iOS 2. Now, what you could also do is open up your bookmarks bar, see your history, see a bunch of other stuff. And what you could also do is open this new page tab and have up to 9 pages, which is still the standard. But you could type in a website, for example, google.com. And it would, of course, return the website. It was not fast. It had 802.11b and G Wi-Fi, which means that the range on this is relatively limited. All my N phones are totally reachable to our wireless N router, but this did only have wireless G support. Now, what you could also do is, of course, use the iPod in the iTunes Store. Now, like I stated, the iTunes Store was brought into play in 1.1.1, and it actually doesn't even work anymore. It's such an old, outdated piece of software that the iTunes Store does not work. But that was what you had, and this was the first store that was on the iPhone. There was no App Store, like I stated earlier. Last but certainly not least, you had the iPod, and since I have no music, it's not going to allow me to do anything. However, when you had music, you could use the accelerometer to use the cover flow feature, which was just the coolest thing ever back in the day. So has the iPhone come a long way in 5 years? But have a lot of the things that I feel are inferior about the iPhone, like the YouTube app and like a couple of other applications, they've not changed. Nothing has been better or improved over the years, and I just wonder, why? What is so hard about updating that YouTube application? Why not let Google do it? They have a great Android one. So it's kind of confusing. I don't understand it entirely, but in 2007, this was the phone that changed it all. Yeah, it took several months. Obviously, this $599 price point, it was not practical. Obviously, without cut and paste, without group messaging, without picture messaging, without a bunch of other problems, without Exchange support, it was not going to overtake the market for several years. But this was the first phone in 2007 that began to change it all. And every iPhone, I don't care if you hate iPhone, every phone that you see on the market is a direct me too to this phone. If it weren't for the iPhone in 2007, we would not see Android where it is today. We would not see other operating systems like BlackBerry 7. We would not see WebOS. We would not see so many different applications and different operating systems that we have the advantage of seeing today. It was all result of the iPhone, and a lot of companies that didn't get on the bandwagon quick enough, like Nokia and like Palm is a great one, and like BlackBerry, they're all really in trouble because they thought this was a toy, and did it totally change the market. I'm Quinn of Snazzy Labs. Thank you so much for watching my iPhone 2G retro review. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, rate, comment, and as always, stay snazzy. See you later, folks.